Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. Welcome to today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. So happy to welcome you to the program today. A special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. As you all know, it is election day. Like it or not, the 2020 election is still ongoing. I'm coming to you from the state of Georgia, where right now we have three, not just two, but three important races on the ballot today. We're going to talk about, inshallah, those races, why they're important to our state and the country. We're going to talk about what CAIR-Georgia, the Georgia Muslim community, is doing to mobilize voters in that election. We're going to be talking about what happens next. No matter how the election turns out, what are the next steps for being civically and politically engaged in the state of Georgia and beyond? And also we want to talk about, current events. We know about the president's attempts to undermine not only the presidential election, but Georgia's presidential election in particular, and also, some of the things that he's done related to our ongoing Senate election. So with that, let's begin. I want to welcome on our two special guests, Mortaza Khwaja, the Legal and Policy Director of CAIR-Georgia. Assalamu alaikum, Mortaza. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam, Edward. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, my brother. And we have CAIR-Georgia's Communications Director, Aska Mahmood. Assalamu alaikum, Aska. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum. Good to be here.
Yes.
How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. Good. Good to have both of you. Always good to be back with my CAIR-Georgia crew, mashallah. So, Mortaza, for anyone who is living under a rock or, watching from overseas and does not bother themselves with the intricacies of American politics, who's running for office today? What's on the ballot?
So today we have the runoffs for everyone in the general election who did not get a majority, meaning 50 plus 1% of the vote, which means anyone who the top two vote getters on any election that was done during the general election has to go through a runoff election. So the two main offices that we have are both Senate races at the U.S. Senate and also a public commissioner race as well. So on the Senate side, we have sitting Senator Kelly Loeffler going against Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's the Democrat challenger. And then on the other side, for the other Senate seat, we have Senator David Perdue going against politician and also local Atlantan John Ossoff.
And then we also have, Aska, I believe, another race that has not gotten a lot of national media attention, but it is very important to the people of Georgia. Absolutely.
This is the often overlooked race that we have over here. It's the Georgia Public Service Commission. And it's important because the commission exercises authority and influence to ensure that consumers locally receive safe, reliable, and reasonably priced utilities like telecommunications, electricity, natural gas services. And they also make sure that the companies that provide us these services are financially viable and technically competent. So the people who are in this race are Daniel Blackman, and they're running against Lauren McDonald, who is the Republican nominee.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So we've got three races going on. Obviously, Ossoff, Warnock, Kelly Loeffler, and David Perdue getting a lot of attention, but we also have the Public Service Commissioner race. Now, the polls are open until 7 p.m. today. If you are in line by 7 p.m. and it's running late, you can still stay in line. So that's important for people to know. And what I'm hearing, what are you hearing, Mortaza, before we get into the rest of the discussion? What are you hearing about turnout? I hear that turnout is good, but they're not huge lines, maybe because so many people early voted, but that was this morning. What are you hearing now?
That's spot on, Edward. It's similar to the November general election where we had an incredible couple of weeks of early voting. Georgians really took the initiative and took the onus upon themselves to early vote. We had 3 million early voters here in Georgia, which is a runoff record. We've never had that number in a runoff before. That does slightly lag behind what we saw in the general election, though, where we had over 4 million early voters. So we are seeing a historic turnout, but not yet at the level of the November elections. Due to that, like you mentioned, we have seen shorter lines, which means voting is very accessible. So all our viewers tuning in Georgia, if you have not voted, if you know a family member hasn't voted, just go out, make a plan. You have 4 more hours to vote. If you're in line by 7, you can vote. It's an incredibly important election, both at the local level with the public commissioner race, but also the very fate. This is incredibly consequential because the fate of the Senate and the Senate majority rests upon this election as well.
So let's talk about, the people who are going to be playing a role in determining the outcome of this election, inshallah. All Georgians, obviously, who are registered to vote have a chance to make their voices heard. But obviously, people of color, including Muslims, are really making an effort to make their voices heard in this election. What is going on the ground in terms of Muslim voters turning out to vote and mobilizing to vote?
Edward, we've really seen an incredible mobilization effort over the last few years, which is really countering the voter suppression tactics we've seen employed in the state of Georgia. Georgia has been called the ground zero of voter suppression. Dr. Carol Anderson from my alma mater at Emory University has a couple great books on the subject, which I'd really plug for our viewers. But just to give you a brief overview, after the Shelby v. Holder case back in 2013, which shot down a provision of the Voting Rights Act, which said that states that had and municipalities that had historically disenfranchised minority voters no longer had to get pre-clearance when they made voting changes. After that, we saw a lot of legislatures, particularly in the South, enact a lot of different tactics in the guise of addressing voter fraud, but which in actuality, according to the very district courts that did rulings on this, disenfranchised Black voters with surgical-like precision. This is the very words of the district court. It was surgically precise. So countering that, we saw this huge increase in efforts, particularly by Black women-led organizations, but also Hispanic organizations. We saw Muslim organizations on the ground arise, like Georgia Muslim Voter Project, which have done such fantastic work countering these voter suppression efforts. There are a lot of these different tactics. One thing I do want to mention, though, the tactic that was most employed was voter purges. From 2013 up until 2018, about 2 million Georgia voters were purged off voting lists in systemic-like fashion. This particularly affected minority communities, Black voters, and Asian American voters, particularly in Gwinnett County. So back in 2017, there were about 35% of people who were eligible to vote who weren't registered. Because of efforts like groups like the New Georgia Project, Georgia Muslim Voter Project, Galileo, and a host of others, I would be remiss to ignore any, but there's too many to name. That number went down to 3% in this past election. In November, only 3% of eligible voters were not registered. So that's due to the incredible work of on-grounds mobilization efforts by these community engagement groups, including our very own CAIR-Georgia.
MashaAllah. So Aska, maybe you can jump in here and tell us what more about the stuff that you've been doing on the ground, CAIR-Georgia and other groups, to try to make sure you're overcoming those longstanding efforts to disenfranchise voters and making sure that people make their voices heard, no matter who they're voting for.
So we've been very busy this election season. It's the never-ending election, right? That is going to end finally today. So we actually, what we thought was our GOTV effort ended up being just the phase one, and then we had to scramble and get a phase two together. But we've had some really good luck. We've been able to partner with Georgia Muslim Voter Project, as Murtaza mentioned. They're doing incredible work too. But we put together a GOTV team specific for text banking and phone banking in our phase one. They have been rallying, educating, and turning out the Muslim vote in Georgia. So I just want to mention we have over 100,000, an estimated 100,000 Muslims in the state of Georgia, and an estimated 71,000 eligible voters among the Muslim population. And we've been focusing on this 71,000 number. Our teams phone banked, text banked, and we had a series of webinars for the weeks preceding the November election, where we systematically educated our audience on voter suppression, who's on the ballot, how, all the procedures that they needed to do, and we shared a lot of resources with them. In phase two, we had a lot of the same things that we were doing in phase one, but this time we added a canvassing team that has gone door to door in the areas that we feel that voters need a little bit more of a nudge or a little bit more education, and they've been working very hard over the last few weeks. We've knocked on over 1,000 doors in rain or shine. The winter temperatures have fallen quite a bit here, and our team has been hard at work. We also bookended the early voting period with a really energetic vote-a-thon earlier, right when the early voting began, and then the last weekend before the election, again in collaboration with Georgia Muslim Voter Project. So really, on all ends, we've just been educating, energizing, and turning out the vote.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So that's the work that's being done to turn voters out. It looks like we had a lot of people turn out during the early vote. We're still waiting to see how many people are going to turn out during the vote today. Can you talk about, what the president has been doing in terms of trying to undermine the presidential results in Georgia? Obviously, CAIR is nonpartisan, but, we're just talking about the fact that a vote happened. The election is over. Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. And, President Trump has not been able to accept that. And he's focused particular ire for some reason on our state, even though, even if he were to somehow magically flip Georgia's electoral votes to him, that doesn't give him the presidency. But for some reason, Georgia is on his mind. Morteza, can you talk about, how that has impacted the work that you all are doing on the ground, this kind of constant dark cloud of someone claiming the election can't be trusted, that voting machines can't be trusted? Has that caused any sort of negative blowback for you in the work you're doing?
Absolutely, Edward. This type of undermining of the democratic institutions and the integrity of the election has made our jobs that much more difficult. President Trump and his administration have actually encouraged at various times voters not to participate in this election because of that their vote won't matter, or because of this completely unfounded claim that if Republicans don't vote in a particular district, the machines that magically change those votes to Democrats will show up negative votes for a Republican candidate. Completely unfounded claim.
We're not partisan, but if you're a Republican leader, that must be somewhat frustrating. But to hear that
Absolutely. We are doing our best efforts to make sure whichever candidate they vote for, whether it's a Republican or Democrat in this election, because it's a runoff, those are the only two up for election here, that we want our population to vote for them. So the Muslim voters that want to vote for Kelly Loeffler should feel that their vote for Senator Loeffler will matter and will count. They shouldn't have to distrust the process that our president is very actively doing. And he began this even in the run-up to the election. He did election night, and his administration has continued to do it. It's a very dangerous precedent. And unfortunately, a lot of legislators have jumped on this and not condemned it, because what this is going to do is in future elections, it's going to undermine that integrity, and election results will no longer be accepted, as has been common in American politics. But now every single election is going to be disputed, and there's going to be this constant rhetoric that democracy in America, as we know it, is going to be is broken, and perhaps it is, but not in the manner that President Trump and his administration is suggesting.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add 2 points. One is that CAIR-Georgia and CAIR National have issued a media advisory and condemning this interference in the strongest terms. And we also want to remember that leadership in Georgia is Republican, and the election has been certified. The recounts have been done. It has been proven that the machines are incredibly difficult to hack because they don't have any modems. So it's very hard to communicate with that machine. So all of these issues, all of these myths have been debunked solidly and thoroughly by leadership that is actually partisan. So, there's really no basis to these claims.
And on the legal side, Edward, both you and I are practicing attorneys. I've read some of these briefs, and I don't know where these attorneys are coming from who are writing some of these briefs. And all of them have been thrown out, which, again, there have been multiple layers of the government that have gone through these claims that are without merit, without evidence, and roundly rejected them at every single stage.
Absolutely. So, look, question. What happens next? So my expectation is that we're not going to know a winner tonight unless there's an unexpected blowout, that this could take, just like in the presidential election, days, maybe longer to sort out what the numbers show. And then there could be prolonged legal conflict over the results. But what are you looking forward to? What's the next step after all this is over? How do we keep the momentum of civic and political engagement? What are you all thinking about in terms of the future?
In terms of results, absolutely, you again nailed it, that there's been over $800 million poured into this election. There are 8,000 poll watchers from the Republican Party of Georgia that are right now poll watching the state. There are thousands from the Democratic Party of Georgia engaged in the same practice. There are countless civil rights organizations on the ground right now, poll monitoring, poll watching. So the results are going to be slow. There was a 3 million plus in early votes. It's going to take a while to tabulate them. They do have some practice from election night, but because of what we saw on election night, where we saw this red mirage, which was talked about before, 30% of the vote was in, and President Trump at that point had 60%. It seemed like a blowout, but because of where that 30% was coming in, which was in-day voting, election day voting, and not early votes, it took a while for the reality of the situation, the reality of the vote, to become more visible. So it's going to take a while. What's most important in terms of the results is not the length of time it takes, but actually the accuracy and the veracity of the vote count. And we want to make sure that every vote is counted and that every vote, it matters. So we urge everyone to be patient. We may see a result tonight, but just given all the background, you can never say never, but it seems like it may take a little while, and that's okay. Every vote, what is most important is that every vote is counted. In terms of continued civic engagement, USCA's put together some great plans. We have legislative session coming up as well, but USCA, I want to kick it off to you for a little bit, and then I can talk a little bit about what our plans are with legislative session coming up next week.
Sure. So, regardless of who wins, we are a nonpartisan organization. Our work continues, and we're already looking forward to our next step. The legislative session starts next Monday, the 11th, and we're already planning a community civil rights roundtable. So we're going to get some leaders from the Georgia Muslim community together. We're going to share our plans, our legislative priorities with them, and get their input on what issues since they have their pulse, the community's pulse, their hand on the pulse, they will be able to share their views. And we are just going to continue to hold our elected officials accountable.
Inshallah, that sounds good. So look, we've got a little bit of time left. It is 3:25 p.m. Eastern time. Polls close at 7 p.m. But again, if you get in line by 7, you can still vote. Have you all heard of any issues with access to the polls today? During the November election, we were worried about, armed, militias showing up, intimidating people. And we got some complaints, but nothing too serious. Are you all watching out for that as well to make sure, people, especially people who are visibly Muslim or people of color, are not targeted? If they are, that people are, they can be helped, inshallah?
So far, I'm watching the news, and so far, nobody people of color or visibly Muslim people have not reported any intimidation or any such thing. But usually, it's the intimidation this time is along partisan lines. So I'm seeing some reports, anecdotes on Twitter or Facebook from Democratic voters who mentioned that they were intimidated or just verbally attacked in some ways, but nothing serious. And then again, because of the history of voter suppression, most of the issues that occurred with voting, the long lines and all of those issues happened in the early voting phase. So today, the reports we're getting is that voting is very easy. There's no wait times. Everything is working as it should be.
And to that effect, we haven't seen, alhamdulillah, we have not seen major issues at the polls. And I say that and then add, we have seen 10 counties targeted with bomb threats, especially in Northeast Georgia. The GBI has investigated it. Other civil rights organizations have also looked into it and deemed that it's not, it's not an actual threat that puts anyone in danger. But polling precincts have been issued or have been levied bomb threats by an anonymous IP address.
I almost want to ask who would do such a thing, but I guess that's something that you can't make sense of and don't necessarily want to make sense of. But it's been a wild few years for politics. So everyone stay safe as you go to vote. It's funny, you think about the thing like a bomb attack on a polling place. You think of that during like a state under occupation, like Iraq during the American occupation, when there was concern about attacks on polling places. You don't think you'd have to worry about this sort of thing in an American election, but it's been a humbling time. No country is immune to extremism. No country is immune to the threat of fascism, apparently. So final words, final thoughts from any of you to encourage people to turn out to vote if they've not already done so?
Well, I'm curious about your voting plan.
Yeah, so I live, well, I say where I live, since I don't want to get any death threats to my phone, but I live in Georgia, inshallah. So I am still a resident of Georgia until the pandemic ends, in which case I'll be moving to Washington, D.C., inshallah. So I'll be voting here in the state of Georgia in person, inshallah. I voted in person during the November election as well, mainly because I was concerned. I had suspicions that President Trump would do exactly what he ended up doing. And I wanted to make sure that my vote was not tossed out because of some ridiculous flawed signature match or anything like that. And alhamdulillah, it seems like that didn't happen to many other people who voted mail. So, but me, I vote in person. So I will be doing that, inshallah.
That's great. Before Murtaza calls me out, I have to share that I will also be voting right as soon as this live stream ends. I have a plan. I'm going to be going and voting in person as well, inshallah.
And those votes are going to matter just as much as mine. I voted earlier at State Farm Arena. Alhamdulillah, it was a great experience. Actually, Mercedes-Benz. I voted at State Farm Arena for the November election. This election, I voted early at State Farm Arena. And it showed just how easy voting could be. Unfortunately, despite my experience, it's not that easy for a large number of Georgians throughout the state, and it's that way on purpose. So last words to mobilize you is as important as access to the ballot boxes, as important as economic justice is, as important as immigrant rights are, and criminal justice reform. All of these things are on the ballot right now with the U.S. Senate race and also the public commissioner race. So your voice and your vote today will have a direct impact on how we see these topics and how we see the issues that matter most to you, whether it's coronavirus relief legislation, criminal justice reform, or any of the other topics I named, has an impact on how these will be framed for the next 4 years or 2 years or however long. So please do go out and vote. Your vote absolutely matters and will make a difference.
Yes, inshallah. And I always say the same thing when this comes up, when I encourage people to vote, which is that, especially for the Muslim community, there are a lot of Muslims around the world right now, who live in places where they don't have a say in what their government does. They don't get to vote, they don't get to protest, they don't get to speak up. And we as American Muslims have a unique opportunity to have a say in what our government does and how our tax dollars are spent. And I know, many Muslims in America and many Americans in general obviously think our system is flawed and corrupt and all politicians are bad and all that stuff, but they're not all bad. And the system is flawed, but it's not irretrievably flawed, I would say. And at the end of the day, if you live in America, you work in America, you pay taxes in America, you are part of the system. So you might as well have a say in how your tax dollars are being spent. You might as well have a say in either picking what you think is the lesser of two evils or someone who'll do more good than the other person. However you want to think of it, you do have an opportunity to make your voice heard, to try to improve things a little bit or to make things a little less bad. And so for those of you who are cynics out there, this is for you. You can make a little tiny difference, inshallah, and quite possibly a big difference, depending on how things turn out. So we encourage you to vote, make your voice heard, exercise that right that many people don't have around the world. And keep in mind that U.S. senators not only impact the things that happen here in our state, but around the world. The U.S. senators, send so much money overseas. They have a big say in every international policy, every foreign policy, every military policy. So whether you're concerned about domestic issues that Murtaza just mentioned, healthcare, climate change, civil rights, COVID-19, the relief bill, or you're concerned about things overseas, Palestine, China, trade deals with the EU, whatever it is you care about, U.S. senators have a say in all that, and our public service commissioner obviously has a huge say in all of the things that impact all of us, our utilities and other important things that impact our daily lives. So either way you look at it, however you look at it, you've got a chance to make a difference, and you should have a say in this election, inshallah. Have we hit them over the head enough? Have we stressed the point enough? We done everything we can?
I think you did a great job. And to your point on the lesser of two evils, I mean, we had Senator Lindsey Graham compare Senator Cruz and now President Trump as getting shot, the choice between getting shot in the head or taking poison. I remember that. He's one of the most ardent President Trump supporters. So maybe you yourself will also change, and the person you end up supporting, you become as ardent a supporter of them as Senator Graham is of President Trump's.
Yeah. Or, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, not to take his analogy too far, but if you think your electoral choice are between drinking poison and getting shot, I mean, if you drink poison, you could still go to the doctor, you can get healed. I mean, so maybe that between the two things, I'm not saying that any of the candidates fit these options, but I'm just saying, we're trying to get to the civics. If you haven't voted now by 3:33 p.m., you must have some sort, either you're very busy or you're hesitant to vote. So we're trying to convince you, vote. I think we've done everything we can. We can't bribe them, that's illegal. We can't threaten them, also illegal. So I think we've done all we can, inshallah. Please turn out to vote, make your voice heard, And may Allah guide the results of this election to be beneficial to the people of our state, people of our country, people around the world. And may Allah guide us all to make a bit of positive change through this electoral process, to offset bad with good, and to do more good than bad. Mortaza, Aska, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the work you're doing out on the streets of our state. And a big thank you also to Georgia Muslim Voter Project and all the other organizations that are out there doing great work to encourage people to vote. We'll see you on the other side of this election, where we'll be having another conversation, inshallah, about what happens next and what the next 4 years, 6 years look like in light of this election, inshallah. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.